Good morning again. Welcome back to Mirador Television Broadcasting out of the White Hart Hotel in Lewes, East Sussex, in the United Kingdom. Sometimes wonder whether it's united or not. So many people falling out with each other. But still, there we are. Right, in the next couple of hours, we've got some interesting stuff for you. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to join Richard Barton, our barrister correspondent, and his colleague Philip Meredith for a little bit more chat about what goes on in the robing room at the High Courts. And then at 10 o'clock, we'll take a very brief break, and we have Liza Page with The Alternative View. So that's what we've got hanging around for you. So without more ado, let's see whether we can make things work, and we can get cracking on the law, the law, and Mrs. Mrs. There we go. There is. I can see that we've now got our thing there, and so let's get cracking. Let's get cracking without more ado.
Good morning, and welcome again to the joys of the Philip Meredith show. We had the first of it last week, and I'm afraid this is having to be pre-recorded because some of us have what's called a practice. But there we go. But Philip, it's lovely to see you again, if I may say.
Well, likewise, I'm Keith as well. Yes, thank you.
Well, the advantage is that I get to see you without having to pay in any way because Keith pays for it instead. So that's excellent, I think.
Now, that suits your nature perfectly, Richard. Yes.
I am admittedly Scottish. Yes. Now, last time we had a conversation about you personally and the sort of arc of your practice. But what we haven't done is spoken about the many and various cases that you have been involved in over the years, many of which are very dull. I know that. I've sat in pubs with you, Philip, and heard about those. So I'm gonna invite, and also I've got to say, under the criminal procedure rules, you've got half an hour, no longer, I promise you.
Well, I was about to remind you of that because the longer you were on, the less time I. And last time we overran hugely, didn't we?
I know what the viewers want, Phil. So it's one-word answers from you, please.
Okay.
Anyway, could you just tell me this before we start on that, because we can see you now. You're a man who's not quite as grey as I am, but can you just confirm that in your many years at the bar, you were referred to as the Ginger Whinger?
That was in Lewes, yes, when I first came to Lewes. In fact, it was Judge Brown. It was Judge Brown. Gower was the resident judge when I first practiced in Lewes. And in fact, the Crown Court, you may remember, was closed for refurb.
Yes,
and we all had to go to Hove.
All went to Hove, yes, I remember that. And so he called you the Ginger Whinger.
Yeah, Richard Brown conjured up the Ginger Whinger.
Yes.
And to this day refers to me as GW, even though we're both now retired effectively. So yes, we had a lovely rapport, Richard and I.
Which bit of Ginger Whinger would you object to, do you think?
I didn't like the whinger bit because I didn't feel I was a whinger. And he always said anyway that he said a number of times on the record that he was pleased to see me involved in a case because he knew there'd be no messing around. And sensible decisions.
I've got 25 missed calls from other members of the bar disagreeing with you about the whinger bit.
Yes, well, only 25. Well, my goodness, the bar.
Yeah, the others aren't awake yet. Obviously,
the bar is clearly truncating more than you thought.
Yeah, they're having cocktails. Anyway, Phil, I digress as ever. I'd like you to tell us about a case, not a case that you did in Lewes, but a case that would be of interest to Lewisians because it was of national, if not international, interest. And that's a case down in Wales.
Yes, it was a case tried in Swansea. There were two trials. One began in October 1989. 82 days into that trial, the judge died. The High Court judge died at the weekend in the lodgings. So we had to go back for another trial that began in May 1990 and finished in the November. I was junior counsel for the first defendant. There were 5 defendants. It became known as the Cardiff Three. It involved the horrific murder of a prostitute called Lynette White in an area of Cardiff called Bute Town, which was a hugely multicultural area. All 5 defendants were of colour. I represented the first defendant, a man called Stephen Miller. I was led by QCs in both trials. He was Lynette White's boyfriend stroke pimp. There were 4 other defendants, all from the Bute Town area. And at the end of the second trial, 3 of the 5 were convicted, hence the Cardiff Three.
They became known as the Cardiff Three, didn't they? Yes.
They became known as the Cardiff Three because once initially Panorama and ironically The Guardian and The Telegraph got hold of the story about the unsafeness of the convictions, the whole thing took on a huge appellate momentum. We tried to appeal.
Just when you say appellate, you mean taking it to the appeal court, the Court of Appeal?
Yes, taking it to the Court of Appeal. Now, cutting a long story short, in the end, the convictions were ultimately quashed, but this was the second round of appeals. The first appeal that we lodged was rejected by the then Lord Chief Justice Lane, and that's when we sadly bowed out. However, when Lord Chief Justice Taylor took over, and by that time there had been huge paper interest, media interest, the appeal for all of them was done by Mike Mansfield, and the convictions were quashed. And it became a leading case on what you and I call oppression. Lord Chief Justice Taylor said of Stephen Miller, who was interviewed 19 times over 4 days, 13 hours in total, he denied any involvement 307 times. He had the mental age of 11, a now leading authority on what you and I know as suggestibility. In other words, a very vulnerable suspect. Gisli Johnson, his first ever trial, he was patronized by the judges as the good doctor. He now, as you know, is the leading authority on this. Lord Chief Justice Taylor, in his comments about the way Miller was treated, he was bullied and hectored. They were a travesty of an interview. Short of physical violence, it was hard to conceive of a more hostile or intimidating approach from police to a suspect. Anyway, Miller and the others spent 4 years in total in custody for something of which they were entirely innocent. The tragedy didn't end there. The other defendants, one of whom was Abdullahi, who was an Arabic chap, his father died whilst he was inside. And then the other man, Tony Paris, who was of Afro-Caribbean descent. They are all now dead. Miller still lives, obviously very embittered. Now, the TV finally got wind of all this. The first one was a panorama program. Then Channel 4 did a documentary called Butte Town and the Bridge. Then Channel 5 got involved with a documentary entitled The Bay, The Murder of Lynette White. And then the final one was only a year or so ago by the BBC, which was a full series called A Killing in Tiger Bay. Now that, I think, is still available on iPlayer, and anybody who is interested, it is a really, really good watch.
Phil, can I just say this, that when you're on Mirador television, you don't advertise other people's TV shows, okay? Just make that absolutely clear. You know, Keith is nodding there.
Yes.
You know, you can say you understand it might be available, but you don't actually say where it's available.
All right.
But none of those have had the advantage of your input on it, of you telling your giving your account.
What, those programs? No. Yeah, they haven't, because I was a very small cog in the machine. I was merely a junior barrister for one of the defendants.
Well, you for what we as lawyers call D1, the first defendant.
Yes.
The prime man, according to the prosecution, and no doubt as part of his legal team, you had to work hard on that case.
Well, I worked very hard, in particular on the appeal, because to try and convey to an appeal court the impact of 19 tapes was not easy. But anyway, moving on with the story, because this is a case that has just never gone away. An author called Sekar took up the baton and began to write articles, and in the end wrote a book about the whole thing. And he made the comment in the foreword to that book, I had no idea I would still be involved in this case 20 years later. It's a case that simply refuses to go away. And it's the case that's had or cast a shadow over my whole career. A shadow in the sense that it just hasn't gone away. And every time I think it's gone away, it comes up again in the media. And Sati Sekar wrote the book, The Cardiff Five, Innocent Beyond Any Doubt. Now, at the time of the killing, members of the public saw a single white man covered in blood at the bottom door of where the murder took place. And they constructed an e-fit of that man. The police failed to find anybody. And then a busybody who was the secretary of the local yacht club, a woman called Violet Perryman, decided to tell the police that she thought that 5 coloured men, as she called them, were hanging around that property at the relevant time. And as soon as you knew it, the 5 were arrested. Miller, Paris Abdullahi, and 2 brothers, Ronnie and John Apty. They were the 2 that were acquitted. And the series that you told me not to mention concentrates on John Apty reliving the whole horrible thing. Well, DNA improved, analysis improved. The case was reviewed in the light of the appeals, and the true culprit was traced by DNA, a man called Jeffrey Gafford. In 2003, he was arrested. He sang like a bird, admitted the whole thing, and pleaded guilty, and was given a life sentence. Ironically, with a tariff less than the tariff given for the 3 who were convicted wrongly. And by a tariff, we mean the minimum term they had to serve, which was something like 15 years.
So you're on a murder conviction, the sentence is automatically life. Judge can't do anything other than that. But
No.
a judge is required to set and it's not like a sentence where people say, well, they only serve half or 2/3 of it. A tariff means that you serve actually that number of years, whatever it might be, before you're even considered eligible for parole. That's right, isn't it?
Quite so. Quite so. Well, the way this case carried on, affecting everybody else, was it led to 2 corruption trials of the police officers involved. 13 serving and retired police officers, in particular those who interviewed Miller, were put on trial. But somehow, the High Court Judge Sweeney felt he had to dismiss the case because of inadequate disclosure. The defendants were not given the disclosure they were entitled to, and he was told, the judge.
I'm just going to pause you there, Philip, just so we're talking law here. Mr. Justice Sweeney, probably the most eminent criminal High Court judge in the country.
Agreed.
And disclosure means giving the prosecution giving to the defense documents that the prosecution aren't relying on, but ought to be made available to the defense in case they want to use them. That's right, isn't it?
That's what I mean exactly, Richard. And a whole load of documents, he was told, Judge Sweeney was told, had literally gone missing. They couldn't find them because of the age of the case. So he threw it all out. And there's this horrible, in my view, TV coverage at the time of these generally retired police officers who did what they did to Miller, all sort of hugging each other, having been acquitted by the judge. And then 2 weeks later, the documents were found, but it was too late to go back.
And they were found in the box where they would have always been, in fact.
Correct. Untouched.
Yeah.
And that led to disclosure reforms. Richard Horwell QC did a public inquiry into the whole shabby business, and it was his judgment that laid down what you and I might call a framework or a protocol for the disclosure reforms that you and I know about and use every day, or you use every day. But it didn't finish there, because the 3 main prosecution witnesses, they were all prostitutes, 2 female, 1 male. They were tried for perjury in 2008. And they were convicted. The judge accepted in mitigation that they had been hounded and bullied by the police to lie about the 5, and they were jailed for 18 months. So that's the story. My daughter, Jessica, who you know, was 3 months old when I started that trial.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Phil, because you know you're a man of Sussex. I'm not sure at the time. I think you were still living in London at the time, perhaps.
No. We literally moved to Arundel. We moved to Arundel in '88, the year of our marriage. My marriage to Jackie, my wife, and Jessica had been born in late June of the year of the trial. The trial took place in Swansea because
I just wanted to talk to you about that because I have experience of this. What's it like? Because, you know, I've done cases that sometimes take a bit of time when I'm away from home. What was it like spending so very much time in Swansea as opposed to at home where you had a wife and baby?
It was a real wrench. I was very unhappy in the first few weeks. I mean, the trial was I took it on the basis that it was a 9-week trial, 9 weeks. It was given to me by my then loyal solicitor in Orpington because it was to them that Stephen Miller went because he was a Londoner, a South Londoner. That's how it came to me. Everybody else was...
Yeah, how long was the first trial before the judge dropped dead?
82 days.
Right.
82 working days.
And just so we're clear about this, for people who might not know the system, it rarely happens that judges die mid-trial. You then had to have the whole case retried. Is that right?
Yeah, we had to adjourn off. So I was able to go home for a short while. And we came back with a second High Court judge, Mr. Justice Leonard, the father of Anthony Leonard QC, who now sits at the Bailey.
Yes.
And we resumed in May of 1990. I kid you not, 82 days into the second trial, Leonard had a heart attack and was taken into a specialist unit in Cardiff, and we never thought we'd see him again. But he did come back and finish the trial in the November with the 3 convictions. So by the time both trials had finished, my daughter, who was 3 months when I left, was 17 months old.
Well, in some senses, I think Jessica benefited from the absence of the ginger whinger over that period.
No, that's right.
I think that's what she'd say, isn't it? As would your 2 sons who were young.
The person I have to pay tribute to, she isn't here to hear me say this, but she may watch this, my wife. Because you have to remember, this was also at the time of the great storms.
Yes.
And there were weekends I couldn't even get back because the M4 was closed. She was putting up with, she had power cuts, looking after a small baby on her own, effectively, no real family around. Her mother didn't really want to know, sadly. Her father was still in London. No, Jackie was just incredible.
It's an old thing being away at the bar with work because I find I walk out of court at 4:30 when I'm away, and I think, what on earth am I going to do before 9:30 tomorrow morning?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's the sort of traveling salesman aspect to it where there's not a lot. So I do tend, as you know, to take, if I can find a hotel that's suitable, I'll take my dog with me because...
Yeah, you take Jed, yeah.
Yeah, he, A, keeps me out of the pubs and B, wakes me up in the morning. So, you know, that's what's not to like about that. Now, Phil,
anyway,
sorry, that was a very interesting, if I may say, I've never heard you speak in such detail about the Cardiff 3. And I think that was fascinating. But I just want, if we can end up on a sort of slightly lighter note, I'm going to invite you to tell us, what do you think is the best line you've ever heard in court? And keep it clean.
Now, you caught me off piece there. The best line I've ever heard. Do you mean in terms of wonderful advocacy, or do you mean funnies?
Funnies.
Ah, right. Well, the funniest line I've ever heard in court. Let me tell your viewers that when a case begins, the prosecutor has to introduce the other barristers in the case. And this particular prosecutor, in front of judge and jury, now retired, Isabel Aitchison, and she remembers this story very well. One of the defending barristers, and she won't mind me mentioning this, was a well-known local Lewis lady barrister called Rebecca Upton. And Isabel Aitchison introduced to the jury as my learned friend, Miss Upstart.
I don't think I should comment on that, Phil. But yeah, it's a clean story. That's good. Well done. You achieved that. But
well, one of my other favourites was I was the victim of was I did a proper old-fashioned armed robbery trial defending at the Old Bailey years ago, and I was addressing the jury, and some bloke in the front row who'd been visibly annoyed at being on a jury interrupted my speech very loudly with the words, "This is worse than Rumpole."
I think we had that put up on the website for you, Phil, as being the best commendation that anyone had ever given you as a member of the bar. So don't knock it, you know. Yeah, you know, lots of the stories, of course, too rude to broadcast. Lots of the stories, in fact, you need to be there to see the context of them, because it's a moment like that where...
Well, another one I enjoyed, again, I was cross-examining a witness, an identifying witness in a trial. I was representing a bloke with jet black hair. And this particular witness was adamant, both in his statement and in evidence on oath, that the man he was describing as his attacker had ginger hair. And I, being the melodramatic person I generally was, decided to rub in the point. And I took my wig off and I said, "You mean like this?" And he said, "No," he said, "You're strawberry blonde, sir."
I do recall being in front of a very po-faced judge over in Maidstone in a long case. I was prosecuting, along with another member of Chambers, prosecuting 9 defendants for a serious drugs importation. And we had a witness who was very nervous indeed. And all I needed him to do was to say, you know, "Did you see a car? Tell us about the car. Tell us about the person driving it." And he got it wrong, and he said it was a convertible. It wasn't a convertible, but he said, "Yeah, it was a convertible." Okay, and tell us about the man. And in his statement, he put he's 5'11" to 6 foot tall, and he was so nervous that he said he was 6'11" tall. And I said, "That's probably why he's driving a convertible." And even the po-faced judge laughed at that. So, you know, that I won't say who it
Well, my final anecdote is a long morning list for what we now call plea and trial preparation hearings. In other words, preliminary hearings where a timetable is set for a trial if a defendant pleads not guilty and so on. And this was a very long morning list in front of a female judge who shall remain nameless, now retired, at Lewes Crown Court, Court 2. And it was approaching 1 o'clock and I made a bid to get my case in before lunch. And
Because you're always better before lunch, Phil.
the setting him up quickly. Touche. And I couldn't. I did this completely inadvertently, and I was apologising to the judge, saying, and I literally said, "There I was promising you a quickie before lunch," and she said, to her great credit, and the court clerk, Helen McCout, now elsewhere, was absolutely giggling like nothing else. And the judge said, "I think you could have phrased that a little more delicately, Mr. Meredith."
She didn't take you up on the offer.
No, I would have refused.
Well, that's very gentlemanly of you, Philip. And Philip, thank you very much for talking to us again at short notice. I know that we've got lots of other things that we will be able to talk about, and I hope we can do that in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you both again. I hope the viewers, all 2 or 3 of them, your family mainly, will enjoy it.
Both dogs and the cat, they sit there avidly watching it, I promise you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, an interesting morning.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. You're still on. So say goodbye to your viewers.
Oh, sorry. I'm still on, am I?
You are indeed.
Okay. Well, goodbye, viewers, and I look forward to seeing you next week. I might not be sitting next to Keith next week. I'm not getting a restraining order against him or anything like that. It's simply that I might have to be in Guildford doing various things there. But Keith has the technology, as you know, and can link me in. So I'll do that. And I'm hopeful that we can also, I'm confident that we will get Philip back for more of his tales from the trenches, because he's full of them. He's full of a lot of other things, but I can't say that on TV, I'm afraid. Anyway, bye-bye.
Okay, so we'll be back in about 5 minutes with Liza Page. Hope you enjoyed the repartee between our 2 barristers and what happens in the robing room or outside the robing room. So stay with us, or don't stay with us, or come back to us, whichever you prefer. This is Mirador Television broadcasting out of the White Hart Hotel in Lewes, and with our usual potpourri, our usual mixture of all sorts of things that nobody expects us to do. Liza Page in 5 minutes.